Michael Lindvall is a Presbyterian pastor. I think he's at Brick Church in New York City these days, if I'm not mistaken. He's also a preacher of some renown and a storyteller who writes stories out of his experience as a minister in small-town churches in Minnesota. And in a wonderful tale called Our Organist, he tells of one Sunday when he was the guest preacher in a little church in Carthage Lake, a mythical town in Minnesota on the way to down and out. And I'll be honest, I almost didn't share the story with you here this morning because it's a little bit long in the tooth. That is, it's a bit dated, and you'll pick up on that as I tell the tale. And not only that, it's above all an illustration of a text that we dealt with here in the context of worship not that long ago, a couple of weeks ago, or maybe to be more specific, within the last month. I know it was February when I heard David Hitchcock read the same words that I read to you this morning. Maybe you remember that too. Nevertheless, I share the story and I revisit the text for the sake of the way in which together they make so powerfully clear who we are called to be as God's people and what it means for you and for me to live together as Christ's church. Now, the Carthage Lake congregation hasn't had a minister of its own since 1959. A handful of people there hold on. They gather one Sunday per month, the first Sunday each month, for Sunday school and for worship with whatever preacher they can convince to come to Carthage Lake. And that is why Michael Lindvall was contacted by Lloyd Larson, the clerk of session at Carthage Lake Church, and asked to come to be the guest preacher at Carthage Lake. We need a guest preacher, is what he said when he got Lindvall on the phone, and then he confessed, there are only 11 members, but they'll all be there, along with an organist. And what he didn't tell was that it was the same organist they'd been promising guest preachers for the last 50 years. It was Lloyd's sister-in-law, Agnes Rickstadt. Anyway, Sunday of Lindvall's guest appearance arrives. He describes the church as he pulls up in his car. A small white frame building. The large stained glass windows, two of them, they drip with sentimentality. One shows Jesus, the Good Shepherd, a lamb in one arm, his staff in the other. I think we've all seen that one. And the other one, we've seen too, Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. And Lindvall notes that in addition to the stained glass window, there were two cars and a pickup truck out in front of the church. And as promised, there were 11 worshipers, 12 on this Sunday, because this Sunday there is a young man among the congregation, the only worshiper there under the age of 80. Now the worshipers scatter throughout the sanctuary, and they each sit in their customary pew. Lloyd explains, there are no bulletins, he says, so the preacher should just announce the hymns, and Lindvall nods to Lloyd and then nods to the organist. And she responds with a broad smile, even though her wig is slightly askew. And worship begins. Lindvall announces the opening hymn. 204, he declares, Spirit of God, descend upon my heart. Agnes smiles and plays, what a friend we have in Jesus. The elderly members, they sing by memory. Only the young man uses a hymnal, and following the sermon, Linville announces the next hymn. Love divine, all loves excelling. He looks directly at Agnes, who smiles back and plays, I love to tell the story. And then after the prayers and the offering, Linville walks over to the organ bench, and he bends down and he whispers, Agnes, Agnes, what are we going to sing now? And she smiles and begins to play, Just as I am, without one plea. After worship, Agnes shakes his hand, but doesn't say a word. Sheepishly, Lloyd explains, I forgot to tell you, Michael, about Agnes. You don't need to tell us what the hymn is, you only need to tell us when. Because Agnes knows only 3 hymns. They're the ones we love to sing. Good grief, Lloyd, says Linville. Do you mean to say that you all have been singing the same 3 hymns for the last 50 years? And Lloyd starts fussing with a frayed end of the sanctuary carpet. Well, he says, we like those hymns well enough, and we know it by heart, and well, besides, Agnes is our organist. And later that Sunday after worship, Linville meets the one young man who was there in that worshiping congregation. Neil Larson is his name. He's Lloyd's grandson. He explains some of what has gone on over the last hour. You see, he says, Agnes is my late grandmother's little sister. In other words, she's Lloyd's wife's baby sister, and Agnes has never been quite right, he says. She never says more than a few words. But she learned to play those 3 hymns 1 week, 50 years ago, when the regular church organist got sick. It was a moment of musical emergency. Anyway, she hasn't managed to learn another hymn since. Nevertheless, playing the organ this one Sunday a month means the world to Agnes. Sometimes I think it's mostly for her that they keep the church open. My Aunt Agnes lives for the first Sunday of the month. Well, I will show you a still more excellent way, writes Paul. And he wrote those words to a little Christian church, another little Christian church, but this one in Corinth. It was a church not acting like a church at the time that he wrote the words, not acting as a church is supposed to act, which is to say they were acting like so many churches often act. They argued with each other, and they disputed the smallest things, and they called each other names, and in the process they made themselves into an absolute spectacle. And so Paul wrote, I'll show you a better way. If I speak in tongues of mortals and angels, but have not love, well, then I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body to be burned so that I may boast, but have not love, well, then I gain nothing. And then, as he had earlier in his letter to the Corinthian church, Paul draws on a word and a concept from Greek literature, agape. Agape. It's an attitude of self-giving. It's a way of relating that regards Well, the needs of the other more than of the self, and the needs of the community more than of the self. You know, the King James Version, many of you probably remember this, is translated agape as charity, as in faith, hope, and charity. But charity's come to mean public philanthropy, doesn't it? And some more recently translators translate agape as love. But the problem there is that when we hear the word love, we think of feelings. And the problem is that agape doesn't have much to do with feelings. What it has is a whole lot to do with how people relate to one another in community. And what it means is, if you take that into account, is that it is primarily a social word. It is even sometimes a political word. And Paul is writing, there is a better way to relate to each other, better than the way you usually do it, better than the way human beings normally do it. A way that's not based on self-preservation or self-satisfaction or self-fulfillment or self-actualization, a way not based upon self. And that's strange and wonderful, is what he's saying, because isn't that the way most human societies work? Isn't that how most human institutions work, by addressing the personal needs of the self, my needs, the needs of the individual? You know, our economic system, we know what it's like because our economic system is built on that premise. It's a machine designed to produce and allow each one of us to purchase whatever we want or whatever we've come to believe we need to be fulfilled and to be happy. It's all about self. But, says Paul, there's an alternative way of thinking. Radically countercultural, whether you're talking about the 1st century or the 21st century, an alternative way, a countercultural way, a way that was actually lived out once upon a time in the world, in human history, in a human being named Jesus of Nazareth. Paul asserts that this Jesus is God's Messiah, or when he's talking to the Gentiles, God's Son, the embodiment of the reality and mystery of God, all in a man for others. A man who lived his life out on behalf of others. A man who gave his life away for the sake of others. What Paul says is that's who God is. That's who God is. Not some Olympian figure muscular and sitting on a great throne and casting thunderbolts or frowning in judgment at human behavior. No, God is here, says Paul. God is this one, the one who gave his life away for us. Then he raises the question, do you think human behavior that has been changed by that God, and challenged by that God, converted by that God, and shaped by that God, looks like? Well, it looks like agape, is what he says. It looks like what we translate as love. It's people who are patient and kind, neither envious nor boastful, not arrogant or rude, a radical countercultural way of being and acting that does not rejoice in the wrong, but rejoices in the right, in the good, and in truth. Go back to this morning. After the 11 worshipers, including Lloyd, the clerk, and Agnes, the organist, had all gone home, the young man Neil still lingered and talked with the guest preacher. Aunt Agnes lives for the first Sunday of the month, he said. Sometimes I think it's mostly for her that they keep the church open. He's repeating what he said before. But then, he said they asked me to play it. They had to ask, but Grandpa knew that I'd say no. I remember how he sighed with relief when I said no. They asked me to be the organist, and he slapped me on my back. You're an organist? Linville asked. Yes. Eastman School of Music, class of '84. I've had some big church jobs. Last one down in Texas. Big church, brand new organ, 102 ranks, 4 services a Sunday. But then I got sick. I've been HIV positive for 6 years now. And the personnel committee of the church down there figured it out. All the weight loss, the sick days, and not being married. They told me it would be best if I just moved on. But not until I finished with Christmas. Now, my parents live in St. Paul. But my father and I haven't spoken since I was 19. I'm not sick enough to be in the hospital, just too tired most of the time. I really had nowhere to go when my grandfather said I could move in with him and with Agnes. To tell the truth, I feel right at home in a town of 80-year-olds now. He paused, and then he continued. They keep Agnes, and they took me in. And since I moved up here, most every night Lloyd or old man Engstrom from down the road opens up the church for me. If it's cold, they lay a fire on the wood stove. And then I play the organ. It's a sweet little instrument, believe it or not. Lloyd's kept it up over the years. These last weeks, it's been almost warm in the evenings, so they leave the doors and the windows of the church open. And everyone sits on their front porch, and they listen to me play. Bach, Buxtehude, Vidor, all the stuff I love. And then they clap from their porches. And even Agnes claps. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. And so it is that faith, hope, and love abide these 3. But the greatest of these